Yeah, I come from the middle of Lincolnshire. We've been here for a long time now. 25 years ago, we pioneered a new church in a rural area called Threshold. And as time's gone on, what that has meant is that as we've made connection with people across a range of villages, we've helped develop new forms of church in some of those villages. So if we could show the second slide, James, that'd be great.
Yep, I'll share the screen now.
I promise this is the only diagram, all right? This is a diagram. Don't faint at the sight of it. There will be photos of real life after this, but the diagram comes first. And all it's trying to depict is that we have a central gathering which involves people from all the various villages that we're active in. So the round thing in the middle, whoops, it's gone off again now. The round thing in the middle is trying to represent what we think we're doing when we gather people together. We meet in a village hall on a Sunday morning, very traditional. And we have the usual mix of the word, worship, community, and communication. Now, these square bits around the outside is really what I want to focus on today. There are different size groups in different communities, different village settings. And so I wanted to show you three kind of dimensions today. This is the big picture. In a minute, we're going to go down to see what we're trying to do in any one of those communities. And then we're going to finish with much greater detail on one of them, just to give you the whole kind of gist of it. So we have people living in about 20 different villages who would say they're part of the church. And in each of those villages, we're encouraging them to be involved locally. We deliberately keep our central programs light, other than supporting what they're doing in their villages. And in about half of them, we've got quite intentional teams who feel called to mission in that place. And as has been mentioned several times already, the three principles we fly by is, firstly, we do it ecumenically if we possibly can. It's always going to be lay-led, and it's going to be both missional and mixed economy. So we rejoice in the mix of the traditional and the new working in synergy together. So that's the big picture. We have a leadership team that oversees all this, but the local leaders in each community have a great deal of autonomy just to pursue what they believe God's asking of them in context where they live. Okay, so what do we ask of these smaller communities? So next slide, please, James. This is a kind of a summary of what we ask people to do in each of their communities. It's not come up yet. I think you need to press the thing. That's it, right. Firstly, that they do life together centered around Jesus. This is not deeply theological stuff, or perhaps it is deep, but simple. Secondly, that they're committed to the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread and prayer, as in Acts 2:42. And that these small communities are kind of our version of what I might call a golden thread that goes through history, which is people following Jesus in community on mission. And that's what we're trying to enable and create in these various village communities. So what I'm going to go through now, so that's the big picture. One church, but it's in some ways more like a network, and different communities and different villages, all with very different feel to them and different numbers, different shape because of the different contexts. Every village is different. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few examples now of the kind of thing I mean in different villages. So there is something different. It's a meal on a Friday night. So they started something called Friday night dinners. In fact, they've now had to have them in two houses because there's so many people who want to do them. When they release the dates, they're generally booked up within the first hour. And essentially, they just meet for a meal on a Friday night and talk about anything and everything. But because there's a few Christians at the heart of it, and only a few, what happens is that conversations inevitably start about faith and about real life and about things that people are struggling with. And out of that has come a number of prayer requests. Out of it so far has become one Alpha course with people wanting to pursue faith as a result of it. And they're still booking up to come to Friday night dinners. It's a wonderful way of just, like Jesus did, just having meals with people really and seeing what happens. There's no overt worship thing going on, but basically the folks who run this are very closely involved in a worship gathering not far away, and people can easily transfer to that if they wish to. And then, yeah, absolutely, food works every time, quite agree. Thirdly, there's another community, Sudbrook and Scotland, where so next slide please, James, which is called It's Life, Jim. For you trekkers, you'll know where the quote comes from. Not as you know it though, yes. This is very much a family thing. And basically they do all sorts of things, from meals to picnics to walks to open mic nights in pubs to sports events to they've got a group called the Flatlander Mountaineers, because there's nothing flatter than Lincolnshire, but they love going up mountains. So that goes on, which is cool. And they're great, really. They have a rhythm of prayer and worship and communion. They have a rhythm of teaching and discipleship. And they have a whole social rhythm and an engagement with people who want to be part of it. And it's really, really good. And that's in another couple of villages. Out of that is coming slightly outlandish. Something has arisen called virtual church, which is the next slide. And so one of the younger guys has started this thing called VR church, virtual reality church. You can look at it online if you want to. And he's created all sorts of scenarios online where people turn up as their avatar, and they sit on sofas on beaches, watching big screens, chatting to each other, surfing, whatever. And because they come in form of avatar, they're quite happy to talk about Jesus, which is what they do. And all these conversations take place on an anonymous basis. Whether it's really church, I leave to your judgment. But what I can say is that all these folks are really willing to talk about spiritual things in that environment. And we're trusting that they explore that further out of virtual reality and into usual reality in other places. Okay, next, reminiscence of the Friday evening is something we call biblical wine tasting, believe it or not, in another village called Stainton by Langworth. As you can see, there's all ages there, mix of churched and not churched, and they are overtly Christian. They have a meal together, and then the overtly Christian bit is that they will possibly pray, maybe worship, maybe read the Bible. They have this kind of cycle going on where people taste wine so long as they're from a country mentioned in the Bible. So it's just as well Italy's in the Bible, I think. Anyway, and then they, out of that again, people have wanted to explore faith further and have drifted into alpha courses, which they do 1 or 2 a year. And the whole community is developing. In fact, one of the couples, I won't point them out, it'd be too difficult to do, but there's a couple there who've now extended their house so they can have a big table in it and do the same thing. So that's a few examples of what kind of things are happening in the villages that we've started so far. Now I want to drill down into more details still, and here the Celtic theme begins again. So can I have the next slide? This is a depiction of a Celtic monastery or a Celtic monastic landscape. And yeah, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the comments. Keep them coming, I love it. Yes, Jesus did go to a wine tasting. I think he provided it, if I remember. Well, they had them in monastic landscapes, I don't know. But however, what's wonderful, I think, about the monastic landscape of a Celtic variety is that all of life was represented there. So it was the center of a community, a real life community. And as you can see in the picture, there was a chapel, but there was barns, there was eating houses, there was fields and crops where people lived, and boats and fishing, and a whole range of activity. It wasn't, somebody mentioned 7 sacred spaces earlier on, Errol, I think. And what it wasn't was the one space which is occasional attendance at an event and look at the back of someone's head for an hour. It was very different to that. It was doing life together with worship at the heart of it all. So we, Kath and I, live in a village called Bardney in the middle of Lincolnshire. So next slide. And it's a fairly deprived village. It's the most deprived village in West Lindsey, the part of Lincolnshire that we're in. As you can see, it has a population of about 1,900. It used to have a beet factory, which is closed down, and which has resulted in a large amount of unemployment to begin with, but a certain amount of economic difficulty that continues. Next slide. In the village, we have several things which could be seen as the kind of church plant, church premises, if you like. Now, I know, I'm all about communities, not premises, but just to kind of illustrate something here. So top left, you have the Catholic chicken hut. It used to be a chicken shed that was changed into a mission church. It was intended to be a basilica, but never really made it. But it is beautiful inside. You've got the Methodist chapel. That used to be the lecture hall. There was a much bigger chapel at one point, but is now the functioning worship space. St. Lawrence's Anglican Church, and above that, the Methodist Anglican School, which is run as a Christian school, which is really lovely. And lots of overt Christianity in assemblies and acts of worship and in the values and etc. Next slide. But there's also in the village other things that have now happened. So when we first came here, God led us to buy a grade 2 listed derelict barn. So the top two pictures, the outside and the inside, in which we began a prayer room. We feel we're called to have a prayer house here. That's what we live in. It's primarily for our family, but beyond that, it's for a larger Christian community. There are 5 or 6 households now that relate to this in prayer and mission. We've also begun a coffee shop called the Open Door, which is not open at the moment, unfortunately, which has really become a hub in the community, a real mingling place of people of faith and none. And those things, those bits of plant together are a kind of representative of the monastic landscape if you're looking at the physical here in Bardney. But it's a lot more than the physical. The next slide shows our values of this community. And we present them, we describe them as candle, table, and door. Those 3 pictures, those 3 physical things represent what we believe God has asked of us to place central. So firstly, the candle for us represents the presence of God. It's his presence, the light of the gospel, Jesus himself. Without that, we wouldn't be church and we wouldn't want to be. Secondly, there's the table. Table is about, for us, community. It's about family. It's about hospitality. It's about study. And finally, a door where there is both welcome in and sending out in mission. The whole thing that we do is really mission focused. It's prayer based and mission focused. And those 3 things, the presence of God, hospitality and community, and mission by welcoming in and sending out, is really, really important. And this is where the life of a Celtic monastic community begins to emerge. And I want to describe some of the dimensions of that now. Because I said I'd drill down to one situation. I think this one's particularly important at the minute. The whole monastic, not just the values, but the rhythms and the way of doing life together, I think can be really important in effective mission in rural areas right now. Not that in any place it has to be the same as anywhere else. It has to be nuanced and has to be contextual, but there's so much it can give. And I just want to show you a bit about how it's emerging here in a sort of multi-faceted way. So firstly, there's a rhythm of prayer and worship and word. So the next slide. And so the rhythm of prayer is a daily one, a weekly one, and a monthly one. I could go through the dimensions of that, but we have daily morning prayer. That's a photo of it you've got there. There's weekly gatherings for prayer and worship and word that go on. And there's a monthly gathering, particularly of the church leaders of the different denominations. We have breakfast and prayer together once a month and we do life with each other and plan mission in the village and the villages around. One of the examples of the monthly gatherings we do is the Messy Church, which you'll see on the next slide. This is when we decided to build a house in the church. And we taught about what church was really all about in terms of community as we got the children to build this house from a kit that we'd invented. So firstly, the rhythm of prayer, worship and word. Secondly, really critically in monastic communities, is hospitality. So the next slide. And the kind of things that we're involved in is not only the coffee shop, which is open 4 days a week and provides a lovely sense of, it's not open at the moment, a lovely sense of hospitality, but also the barn where Kath and I live. And we have accommodation for people here, for friends and various groups and individuals stay here. And then the homes of other community members are also open for people to stay. You know, we'll have the Fresh Expressions rural group here, for example. And it's great. It's lovely just to hang out for 24 hours in a place like this with prayer at the heart of it and just live life together and figure out what God's saying to us or trying to. And then most of the events we do involve food. As somebody said earlier on, I was once asked by the Bishop of Leicester, how would you define a fresh expression? I said, I don't know in some ways, but if it's got food, it could be. If it hasn't, it isn't. Okay, so hospitality was the next thing. Another feature of ancient monasticism, particularly Celtic monasticism, was creativity. So next slide. We get involved in all sorts of creativity here. So we have retreat days, we call them creating space retreat days, where people can spend time in the garden or around the house. We use 2 different houses actually, and just see what God's saying through nature and creation and being a retreat in the natural world. We also have an art group. You can see an example of a painting that someone has produced and is now on our prayer room wall. At the moment, we've got, during the lockdown, one of our Our community here is producing stop motion videos for children on Dave the Sheep, which you'd probably love if you looked at it online. But anyway, Dave the Sheep has been delightful, another form of creativity. And in some of we have an old outhouse here, so an old stable unit, which we're hoping to, in part, convert into an art studio creative space that's planned. And creativity, whether it's in song, whether it's pottery, whether it's any kind of other kind of art, we think is so important in communicating what we believe and involving folks hands-on often in things of God. A picture paints 1,000 words, right? So creativity. The next one is education. So next slide. Education happens in all sorts of different ways from a spiritual perspective here, a Christian perspective here in Bardney. I mentioned the school earlier on, but we've also between us managed to start something called Toddler's Tales, which is a bit like a book club for those under 5. And some wonderful stories are told there. We held it in the coffee shop, and they may well look at the Easter story or the Christmas story. We're resourced by a local library. It's really, really useful. We've also started just a normal book club to get to know people who like to read, who love words. We've run Christians Against Poverty, family finance, family budgeting kind of courses and other things as well. I know I'm going quickly here. Next is about discipleship. So in addition to the sort of educational side, we think the main way in which people grow as disciples is by being on mission in a small group with Jesus. So the best way people grow as disciples is in a missional context, which we try to be. And so as people become Christians, they become part of this community, and they are on mission from word go. That is the frame in which they grow up. And that's the best way, you know. It's how Jesus grew his disciples, wasn't it? It was take them on mission with him. It really shouldn't be a disciple and add mission. It should be on mission with Jesus and you will grow as a disciple. It's that way around. Some of the things we've been up to, I've put there's a group for young ladies, young girls, young teenagers called Hot Chocolate, which is growing wonderfully. It was about to do Youth Alpha before lockdown, and this hasn't happened yet, not even online. There's a mums group of people exploring faith, who some of them have done the Alpha course already, and they're growing in that. We have midweek kind of discipleship forums for more mature people from across the denominations. And then from time to time, we'll have an ad hoc discipleship issue. Discipleship means like Alpha or CAP or Lent courses or whatever. Next thing we do, as the old monastics did, they were the centre of community. We do community events, and loads of them. So the photo there is of the light party last October. It's just kind of a Halloween alternative. And we did Willy Wonka in Candyland. I had to practice that because they really aren't natural words to me, especially the Candyland bit. But it was fabulous. We transformed the village hall. I think 205 people came, about half of whom were kids, who did not come down from their hyper excitement for about a fortnight, especially with all the e-numbers that went forth in Candyland, which of course was completely free for them all. But there are other things we do, like a messy nativity trail. Part of the Celtic heritage here is St. Oswald of Northumbria, who was the king who invited Aidan to start the monastery on Lindisfarne, was buried here. St. Oswald was buried here for 200 years. And there's a huge sort of Celtic monastic kind of background because of that. The first monastery here was built in the 17th century and lasted for 200 years before it was destroyed by the Danes. And all the Christians in the village, of whatever denominational background, can own that heritage together. And so we quite deliberately have based what we've done here on a prayer-based monastic thing because of the roots and the resonance with that, going back into the distant past. We do something monthly called Community. We're here in the barn. We have usually about 40 people come for tea on a Friday evening once a month with kids. And there's nothing religious happens. People just hang out together and build community and friendship. Almost all young families. They can spill over into the garden, have a fantastic time, usually don't want to go home. And those who've been coming for a while bring food with them and we just share it. And it's just a great time. And some of them are people we've met through the coffee shop, others by other means. And then there are other things, the community events, which are perhaps more traditional, like Christingle and Remembrance Day, which you'd hope to find in most communities. And last but not least, before I run out of breath from talking too fast, the last slide is there are some other monastic features, I think, emerging, like pilgrimage. We have people come from different parts of the country to spend time in prayer, but also from places like Norway and Germany. We have friends in both those places who we keep up with, and we've been chatting to through the lockdown. And there's retreat space here for friends as well. People come for the day. One of our daughters runs something called Heart of the Health Service, which is a charity to support health service workers. And before, again, the lockdown, she had retreat days here once a month for health service workers with a Christian basis, but for anyone, whether they believe or not, and done sensitively really well. So we equip the wider church as well. So I think I'll stop there, James. I haven't a clue how much time I've taken up. Yes, I have. Okay, we've got 20 minutes left. But I'll stop there. But just a sense of a monastic picture emerging, which we think is a really useful way to go in rural England at this time, or rural UK.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Pete. I'll have a look at these questions now that have come up. Would you be able to speak about the Fresh Expressions Incubator that you're part of in Lincolnshire?
I didn't even mention it. But certainly, yes. Yeah. Okay, so with another couple, Kath and I started something called a Pioneer Incubator for Lincolnshire under the auspices of Churches Together in all Lincolnshire. And we're on a pilot year. We have 10 or 11 teams, usually 2, 3 or 4 in a team. 8 of them, I think, are located in villages and the rest in more urban situations. And we're bringing together, we hope, on an experimental basis, really, the best that we can find across the UK in how to train and develop pioneers who are just ordinary folks who want to do something where they live, not necessarily wanting to be pioneers for life as a career, although they would be welcome and probably find it beneficial. So the different elements are some experienced people around, a community gathering once a month with contact in between, some coaching for each team, some pioneer days where they meet with other pioneers and rub shoulders, some pioneer training days where there's a workshop every morning, every afternoon, which they can access if they want to. So there's a whole mix of things in there, but we're basically looking at how does a year in that sort of environment, particularly as part of a community of other pioneers, which I should have said to start with, we started the Lincolnshire Community of Pioneers about 10 years ago, and this is in that context. So it's being resourced by people who are pioneering on the ground already, particularly in rural situations. So we're going to do it for a year, evaluate it at the end, and then be able to speak, I hope, more accurately about whether it works.
Thank you. I have a question from John Miller. John Miller, would you like to ask your question to Pete?
Presently in my situation in very rural southwest Wales, I was just starting a brand new Methodist appointment doing mission and evangelism in this area, and church planting, and we're looking at a very kind of similar model with this idea of a Celtic monastery as being the model we followed. However, lockdown has kind of stopped that in its very, very early stages, and I was wondering if you have any ideas as to how we would start something like a monastic community during lockdown, where we don't really know everybody locally, so we don't have an existing network.
Sure. I kind of guess it depends on how many of you are already in relationship, in the sense that if there's more than one of you, you've got a good basis to start. So what we're doing here, I hope it helps, is we do morning prayer every morning on Zoom. Sometimes use Facebook Live, but usually Zoom. And so we go through the Northumbria community liturgy, and every morning we are listening and praying and interceding for this community. And there's no other place to start, really. It might just be a gift for you. I mean, it's, as both Ben and Shalom mentioned, the listening stuff, I guess you know already, but it's so, so important. And I think if you've got a season where there's nothing much else you can do, then do all you can of this. And if there may be ways in which God shows you, you can begin to be accessible to the community around you. But for the minute, listening and praying and just seeing what God says and what themes he opens up for you, it's a bit of a gift, really, however many of you want to be part of that.